Hey, welcome back. Let's talk about something today that's an issue for all pilots because we're all judged on our landings. We even judge ourselves on our landings. And one of the things that any CFI who does flight reviews or initial training will tell you is this is something that people struggle with. And you know, it's really not that hard, but there are two big problems that we see, and there's one solution that solves both of them. Whether you're a brand new student pilot just working on how do I land, or whether you've been flying for decades but just can't seem to get the system down so that you can consistently and regularly land smoothly and comfortably on the center line, we've got a solution for you. Now, first, let me say, I am a flight instructor, but I'm not your flight instructor. Don't go out and try this on your own. Just take it to heart, take some notes, think about this process, grab a local flight instructor, jump in the airplane, and try this procedure. Your best bet is to sit down and talk to the instructor beforehand and tell him why you want to do what you're going to do and what you hope to get out of it. And maybe they'll learn something in the process as well. You never can tell. Here's the deal. New student pilots or low-time pilots very often fall into this problem where they fly along, they're in the pattern, everything's going great, and they come down for landing and they round out, and I don't care if you say round out or flare or pitch up, whatever terminology you like, fine with me, but they go ahead and they round out and they just lock up. The throttle's closed, they're 10 feet off the ground, and they're just waiting for impact. They're not really flying the airplane, and there's a death grip on that yoke or stick. Not really the way to do it. The second problem we see is people who have been flying for a while, even people who own an aircraft, and they'll be coming in for a landing, and they get a beam the numbers on downwind, and they reconfigure. Maybe there's a power reduction, bring on carb heat possibly, add flaps. There's a few tasks to do there, and they get 45 degrees out, so the runway is 45 degrees off their left shoulder if it's a left-hand pattern. They turn base, maybe they add a little more flap. They wait until they're lined up, they turn final, and now it gets a little weird. They start playing with the pitch and the power. They keep adjusting, trying to get their altitude right, trying to come down that glide path the way they want to, but they're not using pitch to get airspeed, and they're not using power to get airspeed. They're trying to use both. So in effect, they're using neither. What you end up with is a very unstabilized approach where everything's changing all the time, and those landings tend to be really erratic. Sometimes you land right on the numbers, sometimes you're 1,500 feet down the runway because there's no speed control. You're just kind of making it up as you go. Luckily, there's a way to resolve this, and it's a simple trick that we've used for years and years, but let me try and put it in terms that you can really understand easily and you can replicate anytime you want to. Consider this. I often fly a Cessna 152, so let's think of it in those terms. Typically, we're flying our pattern. Let's say it's a left-hand pattern. We're on downwind. When we get a beam the numbers, so directly across from the numbers. They're over there, I'm right here. As I pass that plane, I'm gonna configure myself for landing. So that's where I make a power reduction, I pull on the carb heat, I retrim the airplane for a little more nose up, and I'll probably be adding the first notch of flaps. Think about that power reduction. Typically, people are gonna do something in the 1,400 to 1,700 RPM range. And that's fine. It doesn't really matter which number you use because the size of your pattern has something to do with how much or how little of a power reduction you need. But let's go with this. Reduce power to 2,000 RPMs. Remember, we're talking about a Cessna 152. Adjust that setting as would be appropriate for whatever you're flying. But let's say we come back to 2,000 RPMs and we have that first notch of flaps in. And we fly along on downwind, descending slightly now, until we get where the runway is 45 degrees behind our left shoulder. That's where we'll start our base leg and probably add that second notch of flaps. Now as we come lined up with the runway, we're gonna turn final. Stick with the 2,000 RPMs. Just track the center line on the runway. If there's a little bit of a crosswind, adjust for it. But by the time you get to the runway, You want to have the longitudinal axis of the airplane straight down the runway. So you may have to have a little left aileron and right rudder to hold it. You're kind of slipping here, but just track that center line. You're going to be high and you're not going to touch down because you've got 2,000 RPMs in. So when you get to an appropriate point on the runway, maybe halfway down, go ahead and power up, clean up, and do a go around. Come back around in the pattern normally, and when you get to that power reduction this time, come down to 1900 RPMs. Fly the rest of that pattern, and once again, track that center line and get the airplane straight right down the center line for the length of the runway. Not the full length, obviously. You need space to go around because even at 1900 RPMs, you're probably not going to come anywhere near touching down. You might still be 100 feet, 200 feet in the air. Each time you come around, reduce that power by 100 RPMs. What's eventually going to happen is you're going to get lower and lower and lower when you get to the runway. Eventually, you're going to find yourself just in ground effect running down the runway, holding that center line until you make a go around. Power up, clean up, climb yourself out. All these are good practice maneuvers because it teaches you that the go around is not an emergency procedure. It's a normal thing that can be done in a very safe manner if you do it correctly. It's also teaching you to track that center line on the runway and fly the airplane the entire time. Eventually, you'll get that power setting low enough where when you fly around the pattern, you will touch down on the runway, but you'll touch down on the runway on the mains with your nose high, with good control of rudders and ailerons. You'll be adjusting for any crosswind, and you've just accomplished the goal of a stabilized approach with a fixed power setting where you're using pitch to control airspeed all the way down to touchdown and beyond that. Ideally, you want to be able to fly the airplane all the way back to the hangar. Get it down the runway, slow it down, get it off on the taxiway, get the aircraft cleaned up, then go to the fuel farm, go to your hangar, whatever you're doing, but you're always in control of the aircraft. And you never get into that new student problem of just pitching up and waiting for impact, and you don't get into the bad habit of the aircraft owner or the common renter pilot who finds themselves pitching and powering and taking power out and pitching up and constantly changing their approach, which really ends up in an erratic, difficult landing because you were never stabilized. That's really the key. Having a good landing is all about having a good, stabilized pattern and approach that's flown the same way each and every time with just minor variations based on what's the crosswind. Obviously, if I've got a howling wind, 20, 30 knots coming right down the runway, I don't need full flaps. I might not need any flaps because the flaps really give me a steeper descent, and if I have a big headwind, I won't need that. If I have a big crosswind working against me, well, now I'm going to have to lower a wing but put in opposite rudder to keep me straight because I don't want to touch down in a crab. This is a great practice for anybody at any level, and it's worth incorporating into your flight review. By using this technique, we can really get ourselves flying the airplane all the way to touchdown and beyond, no matter what the circumstance. Now, as I say, I'm a flight instructor and this technique does work, but I'm not your flight instructor. So grab a flight instructor, somebody who's capable and competent of doing this, and let them know, I want to work on my landings. I want to get them together so I'm really in command of this aircraft all the time. Because let's face it, when we're taking our friends out for that $100 hamburger, takeoff's generally pretty easy. If you add enough power, you're in the weight and balance envelope, and you can steer down the runway, you're going to fly more than likely. And when you're on the way, you're cruising, your average passenger really can't tell if you're holding your altitude and your heading all that well. But when you get to the other end, if you bounce that landing, if you land 10 feet short of the runway, if you drift 2,000 feet down it because you were carrying too much power, they might notice that. And so will you. So give it a try. See if you can improve your landings, because if you can get your landings down, if you can become confident that you can fly a stabilized approach and fly the aircraft all the way to the ground every time without fail, you will be a better, safer, more competent pilot. Just food for thought. I hope it helps you. Go ahead and click like down below if you would. Subscribe to the channel because we love that, to have subscribers just like you. And if you've got an opinion, pro or con, about this procedure or any other, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I'm really interested in what you have to say. Until next time, enjoy your $100 hamburger, and I'll see you back here on your personal device.